Welcome everybody to the webinar on CAH in these crazy times. I think it's a fantastic tool and hope that it works. So this is my disclosure to start with. As I'm an adult endocrinologist, I will focus on CAH in adulthood in my talk. And I would like to give you a brief overview how I structured the talk. I am going to speak a bit about the comorbidities in adulthood and CAH, just highlight a few of them, and then focus on current treatment and therapeutic monitoring in classic CAH, and in the end also shed light on novel developments with regard to future treatment options and novel biomarkers for therapy monitoring. So just as a brief introduction, you all know CAH is a group of autosomal recessive disorders, and 21-hydroxylase is the most common form of CAH, accounting for 90 to 95% of all cases. And we divide it into the classic and the non-classic form, which is of course an arbitrary division. And in the classic form, the patients lack, in the very severe salt wasting form, they lack mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids, whereas in the simple virilizing form, accounting for about 1/3 of the patients, there is only glucocorticoid deficiency and mineralocorticoids are still synthesized in sufficient amounts. All of these forms have in common that they have an androgen excess, and in a non-classic form, this is responsible for the phenotype, which is PCOS-like, and gluco and mineralocorticoid is sufficient here in the non-classic form. Just to give you here an overview of adrenal steroidogenesis, here you see again the production of mineralocorticoids and precursors, and then glucocorticoids and adrenal androgens. And in case of CAH, you have an enzyme block here, which leads to an excess of adrenal androgens, and these lead to the phenotype of 46XX-DSD, disorder of sex differentiation, which leads to a virilization of females of the external genitalia, but with a normal development of the internal genitalia. CAH is a truly lifelong condition, and in the severe form it starts directly after birth. CAH affects growth and puberty, and patients then should be transferred to specialized adult endocrine care, as it also can impact on fertility and sexual life, and it may cause severe long-term comorbidities and affect quality of life and work life. And one of the main tasks of the adult endocrinologists is to prevent or manage long-term health issues. And this just gives an overview of health problems that we encounter in adulthood. And it cannot be stressed enough that adrenal crisis prevention is a lifelong topic in these patients. And this shows data that we have collected a few years ago with the incidence of adrenal crisis over lifetime in CAH, and you can see that here adrenal crisis most occur in childhood, and then there's substantially less adrenal crisis, but there is a second peak at the age of transition, and this shows that this is an important and vulnerable phase in patient care. And in these times, it's in particular important that this is very crucial, and that all these patients need to have emergency equipment, emergency cards, and emergency medication, of course, and that all should be taught how to deal with infections and how to increase their stress doses. And we also know from this Swedish data, this population-based data, that mortality in CAH is increased, and adrenal crisis is still the #1 cause of death in these patients. And patients with CAH also have a double risk of being diagnosed with any psychiatric disorder, stress-related disorder, or substance use disorder. This is again from population-based Swedish data, and I think we all need to take care of this aspect, and obviously are not aware enough of the psychiatric morbidity in our patients. Again, it also could be shown in multiple cohort studies that even in young adults, the cardiovascular and metabolic risk is increased compared to healthy controls. And this again is data from Sweden, population-based data that confirm all the cohort studies that have been done before, showing that there is any cardiovascular risk is increased throughout all ages. And obesity is a problem in these patients from a very young age on, as well as hypertension that we need to take care of. And interestingly here, thyroid toxicosis and hypothyroidism were found to be increased in these patients as well, but so far we don't know what the underlying cause here might be. And we have a good consensus of how to treat these patients in childhood with hydrocortisone only. So this is the therapy, the standard and the gold standard therapy, and everybody is, there's a consensus to treat these patients with hydrocortisone only at this dose and fludrocortisone, but then after transition, and there is no such consensus and dosing regimen or monitoring in adulthood in CAH any longer. So what are we going to do? And I think that the nicest summary has been done by Richard Orcas actually. He suggested a stepped glucocorticoid therapy approach for adults, comparable to the care of patients with diabetes. And step one of the therapy is again, the recommendation is to only use hydrocortisone twice or usually 3 times daily. But the problem here often is that the bedtime dose of hydrocortisone usually does not last long enough until the next morning dose, and there often is an overnight escape of the feedback inhibition, and that's why it might be necessary to step up to step 2 to add prednisolone or dexamethasone at bedtime to suppress this or control this early morning rise of this ACTH drive, then leading to an excess of adrenal androgens. And then step 3, you can change to the longer acting synthetic glucocorticoids as prednisolone, given twice daily, or as a last means, then dexamethasone can be used. And of course, fludrocortisone, this doesn't change. So what about the different preparations? How do they differ from each other? Oh, sorry. Where am I? Here. Hydrocortisone, of course, has the shortest half-life, so they differ in half-life, in biological half-life, and then in their effect on growth and androgen suppression. And hydrocortisone, if you use it as one, then prednisolone has a higher anti-inflammatory and higher effect on androgen suppression. And dexamethasone, we all know this factor 30 of an anti-inflammatory glucocorticoid effect. That's what's in the textbooks, but we also know from our experience that dexamethasone has a lot stronger effect on androgen suppression, and here we rather calculate with the factor 70 to 100. And important to know also is that these preparations have a different mineralocorticoid effect with no mineralocorticoid effect of dexamethasone versus hydrocortisone, and this needs to be taken into account when you switch medication so that patients are not at risk of adrenal crisis. So how do we control and treatment? How do we monitor treatment? The motto is here to normalize androgens and androgen precursors and to control 17-OHP or pregnenolone as glucocorticoid precursors. And this nicely illustrates this. In the upper panel, you see the steroid metabolome of healthy controls measured by GCMS. And in yellow, you see the glucocorticoid precursors in healthy persons. And in blue, you see the androgen precursors in healthy controls. And when you compare this to CAH patients who are treated with prednisolone, these were 7 patients now, you see that in order to achieve normal androgen metabolites here, you still have grossly elevated glucocorticoids metabolites. And therefrom, we conclude that we don't want to normalize the glucocorticoid precursors, as this would lead to a suppression of androgen metabolites, but we just want to normalize these. And here I just summarized the hormone parameters that we measure for, and we recommend to measure for hormonal control in these patients and the targets. So 17-OHP in serum or also in saliva. We don't want to achieve normal values, but elevated values up to these levels. And androgens and androgen precursors should be normalized. And of course, this is a particular challenge in males, as testosterone is not a good marker of hormonal control in males, as this is just mainly or grossly produced from the testes, and it's hard to estimate which proportion is from adrenal origin. And for this purpose, you can use the androstenedione to testosterone ratio and can estimate what proportion is from the adrenal and what from the testes, and yeah, can estimate if it's a good control or a poor control. And then there is one important thing to know. We know that adrenal-derived androgens, and particular testosterone, cause infertility in not progesterone, sorry, progesterone cause infertility in females and thus need to be suppressed. And therefore, we aim to suppress progesterone below 2 nanomole or 0.6 nanogram per milliliter in the follicular phase for fertility reasons in females. And this means that this might be a cause where we need to over-treat patients in order to achieve fertility. Apart from that, of course, we aim to use the lowest glucocorticoid dose possible, as we know that morbidity correlates with glucocorticoid dose, and also to use hydrocortisone as the physiologic substance as the first-line therapy, as we also know that even independent of the glucocorticoid dose, the longer-acting synthetic glucocorticoids pose a risk for increased morbidity in these patients. And just going back to fertility in females, as this is a special case where we differ, or our treatment is different. Here you see an overview or just a result of fertility, and we know that fertility is substantially decreased in females with CAH compared to the healthy population. And this now shows data from the UK. The upper curve is the fertility in the normal population, and the black curve here shows fertility in patients with classic CAH. And it's very obvious that there is a huge gap and difference between these two populations. But the same study also nicely showed that although fertility is different, the pregnancy rate actually is the same. And the main problem is that most of these women no matter if they're salt-losing CAH or non-salt wasting CAH. They have never tried to conceive, and but if they try to conceive and if they're treated correctly, they can conceive and they can achieve normal pregnancy rates. But it's important to know, and this has also been shown in this publication, that in order to achieve this, we usually have to overtreat these patients, and so there is different treatment goals for achieving fertility compared to other patients. And sometimes, so quite often, our experience at least is that we achieve fertility best with prednisolone and to very evenly suppress progesterone, and this can be even given 3 times daily, every 8 hours, and this seems to work nicely. Another case where overtreatment might be necessary are patients with testicular adrenal rest tumors. You all know that these are adrenocortical remnants that have descended with the testes, or that we think that this is the cause right now. These express adrenal-specific markers, and they react ACTH dependent and are potentially reversible with dexamethasone treatment. They're thought to they originate from the rete testes. They're mostly bilateral, and the incidence is usually about half of the classic patients, adult classic male patients, have TARDs. They can be detected by ultrasound and MRI equally good, and they're always benign. And we know that adrenal suppressive therapy with dexamethasone is effective and leads to tumor shrinkage in these patients. There are several case reports that have described how it can be handled, and of course this needs to be done on an individual basis, and it does not only lead to tumor shrinkage, but it can also restore fertility, but this only works as long as the tumor is not completely fibrotic, and this has been nicely described by and summarized by Hedi Klaassen in a review, as she described several tumor stages, and in stage 2 and 3, when the tumor is not extensive and not fibrotic yet, then adrenal suppressive therapy with dexamethasone nicely works. However, all these treatment options currently cannot mimic the circadian cortisol rhythm, and this illustrates this again. In red you see the physiologic cortisol curve, the circadian rhythm of cortisol, and in yellow you see the cortisol concentrations that are achieved by a treatment regimen with hydrocortisone 3 times per day. And you can see that this always leads to phases of overtreatment and undertreatment, and it's just, well, we try to imitate it with a circadian rhythm given 2/3 in the morning, and then distribute the rest at midtime and at bedtime, but this doesn't perfectly work. And therefore there have been efforts to develop modified release glucocorticoids or hydrocortisone, which can mimic this early morning rise of cortisol. And such a medication has been developed in the last years. Chronocort, a modified release preparation that has been designed exactly to mimic this early morning rise of cortisol. It has a delayed and a sustained release. And here you can see how it works. We know this curve here shows what happens if you take conventional hydrocortisone at bedtime. Then it does not last until the early morning, And here there is still an escape of the feedback inhibition. And if you take this modified release hydrocortisone at bedtime, then it has a delayed release 4 hours later and a sustained release. And these are different doses that have been tested in the phase 2 trial, and they lead to an early morning rise, depending on the dose, how high the rise is, of cortisol. And in the phase 2, we also have seen that this nicely works. You can shift the rise of hydrocortisone towards the early morning hours to mimic this physiologic rise of cortisol. And this also leads to a reduction of 17-OHP and to androstenedione, and to a normalization of both of the glucocorticoid precursors and the adrenal-derived androgens in the early morning. And this modified release hydrocortisone now has been in a phase 3 study in CAH, and I just want to show you the study design, how this study has been designed. It was the largest ever carried out interventional study in CAH in adults. 122 patients have been enrolled across 11 specialist centers in 7 countries. And there was a screening visit first, and then a baseline assessment, and then patients were randomized to either the conventional arm, so they stayed on their glucocorticoid dose, either hydrocortisone, prednisolone, or dexamethasone, or a combination of these, or they were randomized to chronocort, to an equivalent dose of chronocort. And then at 4 time points, these patients were stayed for 24 hours in the hospital, and every 2 hours they had bloods taken for 70 OHP and androstenedione. And at these 4 time points, then there was a titration after 24 hours, which was blinded. And after 6 months, 24 weeks, the study failed its primary endpoint because at 24 hours, hormonal both groups achieved improved control at 24 weeks based on 24 hours 17 OHP SDS, but this was only achieved at 4 weeks and 12 weeks, but not for the 24 weeks. In post-hoc analysis, however, at 24 weeks, chronocort treatment showed a greater reduction in the morning 17 OHP compared to the standard treatment, and also a greater reduction in 17 OHP 24-hour area under the curve. And if we define morning 17 OHP below 36 nanomole per liter as a good control, then the patients not controlled at baseline, they were more controlled at 24 weeks with chronocort compared to those on the standard therapy. This was 85% versus 50%. So obviously better treatment can be achieved with chronocort, and chronocort was also associated with patient-reported benefit, including the restoration of menses in 4 patients and 2 partner pregnancy, and also there were less adrenal crises in the chronocort arm than in the conventional arm. What else do we have as new therapeutic options, future therapeutic options? So there's one effort, as we've just heard, to mimic cortisol release, and the other effort is that we all know that we need to give superphysiologic doses of cortisol in order to suppress or to allow that there is no escape of the feedback inhibition. And the question now is if this can be also reached by other means, by other medications, and there there's the development of CRH antagonists that are blocking here the release of CRH and then ACTH, and which will lead to a control of adrenal androgens. And there has been a phase 1b study that has already been published with such an CRH antagonist. 8 adult women with confirmed classic CRH have been in this study, and there has been an it was placebo-controlled and a defined increase in dose from 300 milligram to 600 milligram of this CRH antagonist. It was given at night, and then the pharmacokinetics or pharmacodynamics of morning 70 OHP and androgens, ACTH and cortisol were measured. And what is the outcome of this study? Here you see in blue the ACTH under placebo, and here in blue 17 OHP under placebo over 24 hours, and then in green and in light gray you see ACTH and 17 OHP results and concentrations with CRH receptor antagonists. And you see that there's not a big difference or no difference between 300 and 600 milligram, but obviously both doses can reduce the ACTH rise as well as 17 OHP, and they also could reduce adrenal androgens. And interestingly, there's currently two companies with two different CRH receptor antagonists in the pipeline, and both companies are now setting up phase 2-3 studies. And well, I think we will have at some point novel treatments and more treatment options, and it will be interesting which of these two components will make the race, kind of, and which is better controlling ACTH release in these patients. So I think these are very interesting developments, and there will be more treatment options in the future for these patients. What can we learn from fish? So we have heard about treatment options, and now there's also development in monitoring options. And the question is, what can we learn from fish? Fish have different androgens than humans, and we have learned that obviously one of the main androgen in fish is also relevant in CAH. This again gives you the same overview of adrenal steroidogenesis, and in red I've marked those steroids that we currently use for treatment control in these patients. But obviously this is not the whole picture that we see, and there is one androgen 11-ketotestosterone, which is the main adrenal androgen in fish, that obviously is also relevant in CAH. And these steroids here can be converted to the so-called 11 oxygenated androgens by an adrenal specific enzyme CYP11B1, and so these are obviously adrenal specific androgens, and that makes them so precious and valuable for CAH treatment control. And these androgens also have been shown to act at the androgen receptor, so they're active, and they are really very active androgens. If you compare the androgen receptor activity of DHT, it just has the same activity as 11-keto-DHT, and 11-ketotestosterone has a comparable androgen activity at the receptor as testosterone. So these are very potent androgens, and the group of Richard Orcus again has compared these androgens, the conventional and the 11 oxygenated androgens in patients with CAH, two controls, and you can see that all of these 11 oxygenated androgens are elevated in patients with CAH, even under a good treatment control. And this may be relevant for the treatment outcome. We have shown a few years ago that for TART, there is no real good biomarker. We all know this, and we have longitudinally assessed our patients. It was 50 patients, 50 male patients, and we assessed treatment control over a lifetime in these patients. Sorry. I'm sorry. I just need to take some water. And there is no difference in treatment control in these patients with TART or without TART. So this is the black line and the dotted line. They are just above each other for pregnantriol or 17-OHP, and the same was true for androstenedione. So there's nothing we can, no means we can really distinguish them by any biomarker. But interestingly, this study here showed that obviously these 11 oxygenated androgens, these adrenal-specific androgens, might be a better biomarker in the future, as there obviously was a difference in patients with TART or without TART, as well as in patients with and without menstrual disorders. So now what is also interesting is that patients, females with CAH, these 11 ketotestosterone correlates with testosterone. And this also makes sense because if there's more androgens from the adrenals released, this adds to the total androgen pool in females, whereas it's just the opposite in males, because if there's more adrenal derived androgens as 11 ketotestosterone, this inversely correlates with testosterone, as this will suppress testicular synthesis of testosterone. So I would like to sum up this talk and summarize that glucocorticoid replacement in CAH should primarily take place with hydrocortisone. This also should stay the first-line therapy in adults. You should always use the lowest possible glucocorticoid replacement dose, with two exceptions for fertility reasons in both male and females. Prednisolone and overtreatment might be necessary to achieve fertility and tumor shrinkage in men with TART. Dexamethasone is a good choice for a certain period of time, and here also overtreatment is necessary. And we have potential new therapeutic options in the future. One that might come soon is modified release hydrocortisone for CAH that might be launched maybe at the end of next year. And CRF antagonists are in the development, and there's new studies coming, and there might also be new potential treatment options in the future. And we also may have new androgen-specific biomarkers for treatment monitoring with these new 11 oxygenated androgens that just emerge as a new monitoring tool in CAH. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm ready to take questions and hope that I can answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for this very interesting talk, especially for pediatric endocrinologists. Sometimes in the pediatric age range, we would use hydrocortisone 4 times in order to overcome the morning surge. Is this also happening in adult patients?
Well, sometimes we do this, but actually this very rarely happens because compliance or adherence is not really good with 4 times dosing. And that's also the main reason why we switch to prednisolone quite often, not only because we don't achieve hormonal control, but also to achieve better adherence, because many patients just forget their midday medication, or they don't want to take it at work, or yeah, so this needs very good patient adherence and compliance, and that is not always the case.
Oh, thank you. We also switched to prednisolone before 18 years of age when adherence is a problem. So it's the same. Thank you.
Okay. You didn't speak about treatment of osteoporosis. How do you treat women or men that have osteoporosis? And when you use only vitamin D or the other treatments?
Well, we follow the guidelines, and so this depends on bone mineral density and also on age and risk factors. And in most of the patients, at least in our cohort, they don't have overt osteoporosis but osteopenia. And then the first step is to go to the lowest possible glucocorticoid dose and add vitamin D. We have only very rarely we have to use specific osteoporosis medication, but we have indeed 2 of our older patients are on osteoporosis medication, but then we just follow the international guidelines when to start them and which preparations.
Okay, thank you.
Heidi, you're able to ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I am from Norway, and I have a question also about osteoporosis. Do you screen for osteoporosis for the patients you like overtreat, or do you screen everybody, or special groups or age groups? That's my question.
Well, this is we screen everybody once. And then it depends on if we change treatment. So because in Germany we are not allowed to regularly use the DEXA scan without a indication, and so we screen everybody once, and then we just optimize therapy. So if there's no need to rescreen if we don't have a substantial change in therapy. So it's kind of a status quo, and then we see where the patient is, and then we either try to reduce it, and we would only remeasure then in postmenopausal women or at a certain age, how it is recommended, or of course if treatment is needed. But in these patients where we see they are borderline-ish, then the only consequence is to optimize therapy, to reduce glucocorticoid doses, and to add vitamin D. And we check vitamin D in all of these patients, of course, and see that they're supplemented if they don't have enough vitamin D from sunlight exposure. But we do not, there's also no recommendation in adults. It's recommended to screen for it, but then it needs to be handled according to national guidelines. And in Germany, there's a very strict law for radiation exposure, which includes the DEXA scan, and that's why we are very restrictive with it.
Thank you.
Nicole, we received a question from Anna Hochtes. Are there studies with chronocord in children?
No, there's no studies with chronocord in children. I think the aim is now to get it launched for adults, and then probably there might be a study in adolescents. I don't think that, this is my personal view only, but it may be difficult in children because, of course, from the pharmacokinetics and dynamics, you need to stick to special rules with eating, and you need to be sober. And so in small children, it may be really difficult to achieve this special pharmacokinetics of this preparation. But I think for adolescents, this will be an option as well, and this will come once and if it is launched.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, for the moment, Nicole, there are no further questions or hands raised. So I think if nobody has any more questions, we would like to thank you for attending the webinar. Thank you, Nicole, for hosting the webinar and for this interesting presentation. The webinar is recorded and will be soon available on the Endo-ERN website. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.